Hey guys, tonight we will part the veil of dangerous mist at dawn on May 19. Itienwu by Saint-Chalio, at Tower Green, where Anne Boleyn, her face as white as parchment, her eyes still burning with steadfast fire, slowly advances to the scaffold. The French sword from Calais glints in the pale morning light, delivering life and death in a single decisive stroke. King Henry stands at the sidelines, the embodiment of ruthless authority, not uttering a word of mercy. Instead of kneeling to plead, Anne calmly instructs those around her to pray for her soul and for the crown, preserving her dignity until her last breath. You wouldn't survive watching this unfold. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and your current local time. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Close your eyes and imagine yourself as Anne Boleyn, once standing at the pinnacle of power, now reduced to a solitary woman before the door of destiny. You awaken in the dense darkness of the Tower of London, where the morning mist still clings to the small window frame. In the silent expanse, the sound of steel being sharpened rings out with steady regularity, like the heartbeat of fate pushing you forward. Each scraping of the blade against the damp stone carries a bone-killing chill, reminding you that in just a few hours, that ivory head will part from your slender shoulders. You bolt upright on the edge of the rough wooden bed, feeling the frayed wool blanket scratch against your skin. Your hands tremble not from the cold, but from an internal shock, thoughts of a brilliant past, of the throne and crown once perched on your head. For a fleeting moment, you believe yourself still the Queen of England, wielding immense power. But that dream instantly shatters. Your breaths come faster as you hear the carpenter's hammer echo through the archway, composing a symphony of sorrow. Knock, knock, knock. Each blow affirming that time waits for no one. You rise and step toward the small dressing table, where the tilted mirror reflects a weary image, darker-ringed eyes and ash-pale cheeks. You smooth back the hair twisted neatly at your nape, trying to reclaim a shred of confidence in those hands that have never known trembling. The grey morning gown and pure white kirtle are draped on you in silence, colours of grief and purity, chosen by Henry VIII himself. So you appear as a penitent sinner rather than a victim of intrigue. You wonder, does anyone beyond those who once shared your bed understand the bitter significance of that design? The air in the chamber is heavy with the stench of Thames mud, mingled with billowing incense smoke from the nearby chapel. You inhale deeply, tasting the cold metallic tang as though blood was seeping from beneath the blade. The prayers for your soul murmur like a relentless tide, begging God's mercy. Yet your heart aches for only one thing: to know why love and power can so easily twist a human life beyond recognition. Amidst the cacophony, memories of that January morning emerge in vivid clarity. You collapsed when you learned you had lost another child. The legend says it was a prince, born on the very day Henry lay unconscious after his fall from a horse. That tragic coincidence became a cruel joke, as the king teetered on the brink of death. Your hope for a male heir vanished into a storm cloud. Rumours spread that your marriage to Henry was cursed from above, an accusation that you had defied divine will. From that day forward, you felt power slip through your fingers with ruthless force. Thomas Cromwell, Henry's loyal lieutenant, began to weave a treacherous plot, accusing you of affairs with musicians, courtiers, and even your brother George under the monstrous charge of incest. Each allegation was laid out with meticulous care, like a blood-soaked drama, designed to brand you a traitor in the eyes of the public. You understood you were cornered, but you refused to let them strip away your final shred of dignity. You returned to the bedside. Sit down and watch the faint beam of light flickering through the window. Beads of sweat roll down your forehead, mingling with the mist outside the tower. Your mind wrestles with guilt for having hurt the king and a desperate desire to preserve whatever honor remains. In that moment where past and present converge, you realize that no matter how history judges you, you will retain the grace of a woman who dared to live, to love, and to face her fate. And when the last hammer blow falls, and your head is poised to leave your body, you gently close your eyes, praying for your soul and for the crown of England, your unspoken final testament, leaving posterity with the image of a queen steadfast to her last breath. The moment rumours of your curse and Henry's near-eye death spread through the court, Thomas Cromwell, the king's crafty confidant, wasted no time launching the campaign to bring you down. He knew that with a politically weighty indictment, Henry would discard you like tattered garments without hesitation. Cromwell set about weaving a script of crimes in which every detail had to be meticulously arranged to strike directly at the hearts of the public and the council. You, already weary from weeks of imprisonment, could never have imagined how brutal this plot would be. Cromwell's first spear aimed at Mark Smeaton, the young court musician with glossy black hair and an innocent charm, rarely found at court. On the 30th of April, 1800, Smeaton was summoned to Cromwell's house in Stepney. No one knows the full extent of the torture he endured. Whispers speak of flogging, legirons, even imprisonment in a dark cell. Under that terrible pressure, Smeaton broke and confessed to having an illicit affair with you. Every detail he recounted, from a clumsy kiss in the palace shadows to secret midnight trysts, was reported in excruciating detail, as if written into a lavish tragicomedy, so that everyone would believe you had truly betrayed the crown. With that evidence in hand, Cromwell carried out mass arrests. On May 1, amid the raucous May Day festivities, Henry Norris, the king's most trusted groom of the stool, was seized. The sight of a higher-ranking official being dragged from the grand banquet sent shockwaves through the palace. Screams of alarm, stunned glances, and horror, as everyone realized that the man closest to the king was now accused of treason. Norris was escorted to the Tower of London in his everyday attire, his eyes still wide with confusion. Cromwell did not stop there. He next hunted down William Brereton, a wealthy and respected Welsh noble, and Francis Weston, a young married nobleman of privilege. They were arrested on May 4 and 5, respectively. Both faced charges of adultery with you. But Cromwell went further. He accused them of plotting to murder the king, so you could freely remarry your lover and negotiate power behind the scenes. This coup d'état scenario was drawn out in grisly detail, chilling anyone who imagined a palace overthrow unfolding right under the royal nose. But the greatest shock came when George Boleyn, your brother, Viscount Rochford, who had stood by you through every upheaval, was arrested on May 2 for incest. The charge was so filthy that even the most devout Tudor courtiers recoiled. Whispers claimed Cromwell had deliberately chosen May Day, the festival of fertility, to arrest George, mocking the very celebration of life. His aim was clear: to make you the vilest criminal imaginable, so no one would dare defend you. For to support you was to condone the monstrous crime of incest. All of this unfolded in less than a week. From Smeaton's coerced confession to George's arrest, the court seemed to collapse into a stunned silence as the public reeled at Cromwell's speed and cunning. You could feel the suffocating atmosphere, the tower's corridors filled with hushed voices, the constant clank of cell door locks, the hurried footsteps of guards. Everyone seemed to wait for death at any moment. During those days, you were confined to a small chamber, cut off from all contact with the outside world. You only knew what seeped through the crack of the door. Political verdicts already decreed. Former friends turned their backs, and subtle warnings from officials that any resistance would earn you the same fate as them. Each night, you forced your mind to stay strong, promising yourself to preserve your dignity and never show Cromwell a hint of fear. You recalled how George once stood beside you, soothing Henry's anger and sharing in every injustice. As long as he was at your side, you believed you would never be alone. Yet now, Even Smeaton's once soothing melodies meant nothing, replaced by a merciless indictment that weaponized music itself. You felt a lump in your throat, not from regret, but from the pain of seeing your brother humiliated before the world, silently. You wondered, had you become a pawn in Henry's game? Were the years of wielding power and tasting glory a siren song that led you into this trap? But such questions offered no comfort now. Only one truth remained. Cromwell had delivered a fatal blow, dragging you and all who shared your fate into a vile spectacle, painting you with crimes that left no path for defense. Finally, you gazed out at the window, where mist and smoke still swirled. In the dim lamplight, you saw yourself standing in the eye of a political storm, with no escape. Everything had happened so fast, a meticulously staged drama that let you no time to breathe while the hammer blows building the scaffold sounded relentlessly, reminding you that the cruelest moment was drawing near. In that instant, when hope and despair met, you vowed to yourself, no matter what history records, you would keep your honor intact to the very end, a testament to the unyielding courage of a woman condemned by fate. When the bells of Westminster Hall rang to announce that the trial of your accomplices had begun on May 12, Etienne by Saint-Chalot, you were still confined in the small chamber within the Tower of London. All contact with the outside world had been nearly severed, yet the low murmur filtering through the door crack was enough for you to picture the chaotic scene. The judge, Cromwell's henchmen, platoons of guards in gleaming armour, and a throng of onlookers packed along the stone hall. Westminster Hall was not a place to seek justice, but a stage meant to conceal a plot already hatched. You clenched your teeth, imagining yourself absent there to shatter this filthy drama. The bulk of the so-called evidence consisted of hurried testimonies from servants, gifts you had once bestowed, or casual encounters by torchlight at court. The anxious servants stumbled over their words as they recounted every light touch of your hand, every small bundle of cloth you had given, as if those gestures alone proved adultery. You wondered whether they remembered each detail accurately, or whether Cromwell's persuasive tongue had filled their heads. Smeaton, the young musician, maintained his confession despite the promise of clemency, suggesting his will had been broken under the torture blade. Norris, Brereton, and Weston, three court officials once at the heart of royal affairs, remained absolutely silent in the dock. Even when offered reduced sentences in exchange for a confession, they chose death over bowing before this absurd tribunal. Their steadfast refusal made them tragic, symbols of justice trampled beneath boot heels. In your mind's eye, you saw Henry Norris, the king's former groom of the stool, locking eyes with the presiding judge, his weary face unmoved, becoming a sweet source of inspiration amid the torrent of injustice. The trial moved swiftly, its outcome already scripted: treason and adultery. The probing gazes of the crowd and the whispered comments of nobles and officials felt like a cold wind blowing through your heart. Perhaps they believed you were seated in Westminster, settling accounts for yourself, but in truth, you could only listen to each verdict echo through the tower's stones. Every pronouncement not only cut into your reputation, but struck at the public's belief that justice still existed. On May should see, the low murmur turned to cries as the crowd gathered on Tower Hill to witness the executions of the four men. You heard the guards' heavy footsteps and the wind whistling through iron grates. Then the sound of the axe falling harsh and dry struck your chest like a hammer blow. A life, a bond to you, severed in an instant. They, Smeaton, Norris, Breton, Weston fell in the pale light, their bodies cold, as if dissolving into the air. Not long after, it was George Boleyn's turn, your brother sentenced to beheading, though with the sword to preserve a shred of mercy for the king. The final hammer blow completed the scaffold, the sign that the cruelest fate had been decreed. You heard the thud of his head wrapped in white cloth, the sighs and prayers echoing across the stone floor. It all happened so fast you had no time to mourn, only a hollow ache in your chest as though it had been torn open. while you bore your ultimate grief. Word spread of the forthcoming wedding. Henry VIII had already planned to marry Jane Seymour, the ideal wife. Loyal, gentle, and promising to bear him a prince. That announcement cut straight into your bleeding heart. The moment Liv's link to you was severed. He was ready to slip the ring onto another finger. Jane, once kneeling in service to you, would become the new queen. Inheriting the titles and power you once held, you wondered, did any of them see Henry's ruthless calculation? Did anyone question why he raced ahead so recklessly after slaying the wife for whom he had once broken with the Roman Church? Rather than pause to show remorse, he dismissed all pity and plotted a new marriage, decisive and cold. Henry affirmed that power waits for no one, and love cannot delay the march of ambition. You returned to your lonely chamber. Eyes blurred as you gazed at the pale white parchment, just delivered the final settlement arranging Henry's marriage to Jane. The scent of incense still lingered in the air, reminding you that whispered prayers cannot alter fate. Once more, you told yourself, this is not an ending but merely the prologue to a tragic chapter of which you are the center. In the silence, the scaffold hammer's steady ring reminded you that history moves on. Regardless of whether you remain to watch, you are led from your cramped cell on the morning of May 15. Etienne by Saint-Chelou, within the walls of the Tower of London, to stand before your private trial. The air is bitterly cold, lit only by the faint glow of torches lining the stone corridor. You wear the black mourning gown, the colour of a traitor, of grief and dispossession, tightly laced at the neck, covering your chest completely, leaving only your trembling hands exposed. Your hair is drawn back neatly, and your face still holds its royal dignity for one final display. Even as all your power slips away, the courtroom is small but packed. At the front sits Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, your own uncle, and the Lord High Steward of England on his elevated bench. His expression is stern, his gaze devoid of affection. On either side are rows of officials, interpreter guards, and a handful of Cromwell's hand-picked dignitaries. You know they are all there on orders, to convict you. Regardless of truth or evidence, Westminster Hall, where your alleged co-conspirators were tried, was the main spectacle. But this right here in the Tower is the final judgment against you. The Duke of Norfolk reads the indictment in a cold, measured voice. 5 counts of adultery, each prefaced with precise dates and locations from the banquet at Greenwich Palace on October 6. Etienne by Saint-Chassain. To the infamous revelries at Whitehall, every charge is supported by exact details. Anne Boleyn committed adultery with Henry Norris on October 6. 1533 at Westminster Palace, with William Brereton on November 8. 1533 at Whitehall, with Mark Smeaton on April 26. 1536 at Hampton Court, with Francis Weston on May 20. 1534 at Greenwich, and with George Boleyn on November 2. 1535 at Hampton Court. Hearing these, your mind reels. These timelines contradict your own movements. Yet the conspirators have already set the script in stone. Next, Norfolk's tone deepens into a grave pronouncement of incest with your brother, George Boleyn. The conduct of Anne and George in violating the natural order has aroused outrage even within the court and cannot go unpunished. Each word lands like a thunderclap, not to prove guilt, but to mask the blatant fabrication. The word incest shatters the air, ensuring the audience recoils, and recoils from you without hesitation. When Norfolk finishes, you are invited to rise and speak in your defense. All eyes turn to you, from the presiding judge to the sword-bearing guards. From high officials to the servants who once served you, you draw a deep, steadying breath and issue a calm refutation. I swear before God and this court that I have never betrayed the king. These accusations are utterly false and the work of others' invention. You yearn for legal counsel or witnesses to be called. But the laws of the day deny women, especially a condemned queen, the right to defend themselves. Instead of permission to question or demand proof, you are allowed only these few words before being ordered to sit. You bow respectfully, your posture unbowed, and instruct the attendants and onlookers to pray for the king and for your soul. Inside, you are torn hoping Henry will show mercy at your prayer, yet weighed down by the cruel reality of politics. After a few moments of silence, Norfolk raps his gavel to announce the verdict. The presiding judge declares, "The Court of Westminster Hall has clearly established Anne Boleyn's guilt of treason and adultery. Her sentence is death, by burning or beheading at the king's pleasure." Though framed as mercy in allowing the sword rather than the stake, the sentence remains a political decree. Henry spares no image of torture, yet affirms his absolute power. You hear the verdict like lightning splitting a clear sky. Your chest tightens, but you do not slump. You stand tall, chin raised, preserving the last shred of dignity you possess. A faint, mascara-streaked smile touches your lips as you solemnly say, "Pray for His Majesty the King, and pray for my soul." Amid the circle of officials and soldiers, your words ring out in lonely resonance, a final spark before the darkness of destiny. Deep down, you do not know whether Henry truly hears your prayer, or merely awaits the chance to erase your memory from history. The faint hope of his mercy, once sworn to protect you at all costs, dies the moment you catch the cold light in his distant gaze. That thought cuts you like a blade, the wound deeper than any sentence. Born of love, turned to ruthless betrayal. The moment passes swiftly, the trial ends, and the guards return you to your cell to prepare for the scaffold. You walk under heavy footsteps, each cold stone stepping beneath your cloistered shoes, echoing the merciless verdict. In your mind, you vow that from this instant only one hope remains, that your soul may find peace, that your daughter Elizabeth will one day learn the truth and clear your name, and that justice may finally rise, though perhaps too late. Back in the empty chamber, you smell incense, smoke and fresh sawdust from the newly erected scaffold. The steady rasp of the file on iron still rings out, reminding you that only hours remain. You sit on the wooden stool by the window, gazing at the ashen sky where the final light is fading. In that hushed moment, you close your eyes and pray that this judgment will not be the end, but the spark that ignites future generations' questions about the nature of justice and power. With your last breath before facing your final hour, you swear that though your body may perish, the truth of who you were will never be extinguished. In the final days, you prepared every detail down to the very last minute. Word spread swiftly that the king had summoned a French swordsman to carry out the beheading ritual, a method said to be quicker than the traditional English axe, and to avoid the risk of a botched strike caused by the executioner's hesitation. The identity of this swordsman was kept strictly secret. All anyone knew was that he hailed from the royal court across the English Channel. With a reputation in the French courts for razor-sharp technique and the ruthless resolve necessary to complete his grim task without mercy, on the eve of your fateful day, you spent hours in your cell praying and readying your soul. Quiet prayers rose and fell, mingling with the soft sighs of your loyal attendants, the only ones permitted to stand by you at this hour. You entrusted them with your royal robes, crown, and jewels, symbols of power. You now willingly renounced. In the flickering torchlight, you removed your rings of gemstone and strands of pearls, placing each luxurious emblem of authority into the hands of the waiting ladies. As a voluntary act of submission before fate, for your final attire, you chose a gown of ash grey, paired with a pristine white kirtle colours, both mournful and pure, declaring your innocence even as you faced the vilest accusations. Every stitch and seam you adjusted yourself, preserving a final semblance of order amid the chaos of your life's unravelling. Your last meal was simple: coarse dark bread dipped in deep red wine, a silent farewell feast between two worlds. Life and death. You lifted the chalice to your lips. Its bitter tang lingered on your tongue like a foretaste of the parting to come. As morning's mist still clung to each blade of grass, you awoke with a heavy heart. In the dim light, you rose hastily from your pallet and stepped from your cell, each footfall a farewell to your once glorious past. Your spirit hovered between memories of the crown and the humiliation of the present, yet you managed to maintain a rare composure. Outside, only the guard's measured breathing and the final hammer blows completing the scaffold broke the silence. On the lush green turf of the Tower Green, the carpenters had erected a simple yet sturdy wooden frame. The scaffold stood no more than 5 feet high, designed so the public could clearly witness this unprecedented spectacle. Beneath its platform, golden straw was spread evenly to absorb blood, ensuring a swift and secure execution without slips. The execution crew had rehearsed repeatedly, inspecting every plank and joint so that not one detail might fail them. A dense crowd gathered around the execution site. Women dressed in mourning, men cloaked in black, children hoisted onto shoulders to catch a glimpse. The air crackled with tense curiosity. Never before had a woman who once ruled as queen faced execution. Murmurs of prayer, whispers, speculating on the fate of the woman who once wielded power, second only to the king, now blended into a single, hushed chorus, awaiting the final act of history. You walked forward with steady steps, crossing the stone threshold, and heading directly toward the scaffold. Your gaze never left the French sword concealed beneath its cloth, yet your lips curved into a faint smile. Reflecting acceptance and calm, you knew you had no choice but to preserve whatever dignity remained before the watching world. Each step as your shoe tapped, the wood echoed with a silent mantra. Maintain your honor. As you ascended the platform, the hubbub below seemed to hush. The crowd fell into a reverent stillness. You turned to face them, eyes brimming with tears yet unshaken. Among those gathered, who truly understood your sacrifice, who would dare stand to defend a woman falsely condemned? The French blade was drawn from its wrappings, slimmer, longer, and sharper than an axe. It was designed for a single, precise stroke. The executioner, a figure cloaked in black, face obscured beneath a hood, stood motionless beside the block, prepared to carry out his duty. Dawn's light filtered through the mist, casting cold, steely glints across the sword's edge. In accordance with custom, you knelt and laid your neck upon the polished block. Your final prayer echoed silently in your mind. You begged God to shelter your soul and implored the onlookers to pray for England. No sound broke the hush, except for the whispered recitations from the crowd like the final, somber note of a requiem. This was the last moment you felt life's breath before the blade fell. A single stroke, swifter than a sigh, severed every tie between you and the world. The crowd gasped in stunned silence, then erupted into a tumult of whispers. Incense of smoke, the scent of fresh timber, and the lingering taste of your final wine mingled in the air. You departed with regal bearing, an execution born of cruelty and the cost of power, leaving an indelible scar on the annals of the English monarchy. Though your body vanished, the story of a steadfast Queen Anne Boleyn would endure forever in humanity's memory. In the hush following the sword's fall, your mind had scarcely begun to settle, when a clamour rose, heralding the trial of the men accused of conspiring with you. This was not your personal hearing, but a mass trial held on May 12, 1536. At Westminster Hall, the famed stone hall of English law. That day, Westminster Hall did not bear the solemn air of justice sought, but served merely as the stage for a premeditated political drama. The evidence presented rested almost entirely on the testimony of Mark Smeaton, a court musician who had been tortured by Cromwell's henchmen until he broke and confessed to adultery with you. Smeaton's blood and tears proved nothing of any relationship. But under the torture blade, truth became fragile. Alongside this, rumours whispered by palace guards, none bold enough to defend you, were trotted out as key proof. They claimed to have seen you hand Henry Norris a soft silk kerchief, witnessed William Brereton holding your hand through the iron grating, and heard Francis Weston whisper in your ear by torchlight a vague, absurd chain of evidence spun into something seemingly undeniable. When Henry Norris, William Brereton, and Francis Weston were called before the court, they displayed astonishing calm. Though they knew death might await them, the three remained silent, refusing to plead guilty even after Cromwell promised to reduce their charges if they cooperated. Their extraordinary steadfastness stirred admiration in the public. Many believed that, even in face of death, they would not bow before this injustice. Yet courage alone could not overcome the vast political machinery manipulating the courts. The trial moved swiftly. The presiding judge, acting under Cromwell's indirect influence, declared the three guilty of adultery and treason. Relying on Smeaton's coerced confession and those hazy guard rumours, those surrounding Westminster Hall admired them in secret. But not enough to halt the predetermined gavel. Generations of sentences had already been decreed. Regardless of truth, politics had blurred the line between justice and deception, leaving a bitter aftertaste for anyone daring to ask, where is the justice? On May should see. At Tower Hill, the longer-standing site for traitor executions, the four men were beheaded in sequence. You, temporarily housed in the Tower of London, heard the crowd's murmurs and the dry thud of the executioner's axe. Each strike seemed to cleave into your own heart. A life, a bond to you, severed in an instant. Smeaton, Norris, Brereton, and Weston fell upon the cold wooden frame, their bodies chilled as if drained of all vitality. Not long after, it was your brother George Boleyn's turn. He too was executed by the sword, as a gesture of mercy on the king's part. The act of fraternal loyalty he had once shown you now lay drenched in blood and cruelty, as if the Boleyn family's tragedy was etched in every scarlet streak across the scaffold. Before you could recover from that mourning spectacle, you yourself faced your private trial on May 15, in the very great hall of the Tower of London. The atmosphere there was stifling compared to Westminster Hall. 4 stone walls encircled you, lit only by torches casting light on ancient moss. You were required to wear the black mourning gown, the garb of a traitor overlapping tightly at the neck, exposing only your trembling hands. Your hair was pinned up, yet a remnant of royal dignity lingered. Your final challenge to the buried notion of justice. No defence counsel or witnesses were permitted. Your uncle, Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, now sat as presiding judge, compelled to read the detailed charges, 5 counts of adultery with named lovers, each dated and located, plus the incest charge with your brother George. These figures and place names were presented as ironclad proof, though they bore no relation to your true whereabouts. Each accusation served not to establish guilt, but to conceal shameless fabrication, chilling every listener to the bone. You rose and strove to deny calmly. I swear before God and this court that I have never betrayed the king. These accusations are wholly unfounded. But instead of permission to question or request verification, you were ordered to sit down. The entire trial was scripted to push you toward death's brink, offering no avenue for your defense. Within minutes, Norfolk rapped his gavel and pronounced verdict and sentence. Anne Boleyn is guilty of treason and adultery. Her punishment shall be death, by burning or beheading at the king's pleasure, though framed as mercy by sparing you from the stake. The sentence remained a political decree. Henry would avoid the spectacle of his queen aflame, yet firmly reassert his absolute authority. You heard the verdict like thunder splitting a clear sky. Your chest felt crushed, yet you held yourself upright, preserving your final dignity. In a measured voice, you softly urged, "Pray for His Majesty the King, and pray for my soul." Those parting words rang out faintly, a triumph of the last vestige of your honour. You did not know if Henry ever heard that prayer, or if he used it as excuse to turn away and proceed with marriage to Jane Seymour, the ideal wife, loyal, gentle, and promising a prince to succeed him, escorted back to your cell to prepare for the scaffold. Your heavy footsteps echoed on the stone floors. You vowed that, though history might deny you, the truth of your dignity and steadfastness as a wronged queen would endure, and in that moment, you knew the tragedy had not ended, but had only opened the next chapter in Tudor cruelty. Immediately after the last hammer blows secured the scaffold, and the echoes of the unjust trial faded, you were returned to the chamber once lavishly decorated for your coronation. Preparations now transformed into a gilded prison. The rich tapestries, crimson velvet drapes, and gleaming brass candlesticks no longer inspired pride, but only underscored the contrast between past glory and current darkness. In this room you began to count down each final minute. Each corner of stone, each lichen-stained crack bearing witness to the last steps of a queen about to depart this world. Sir William Kingston, the Constable of the Tower, was charged with watching you closely and recording every gesture, word, and expression during these grim days. At each brief encounter, he sat upright at a wooden desk, leather, ledger, and quill always at hand. You could feel his unblinking scrutiny, as though he were capturing every moment of a life awaiting its final judgment. Sir Kingston silently noted everything, your moments of resolve and the final tears slipping down your cheeks without a word of judgment, only fulfilling his duty to the crown. In rare, fleeting moments you summoned your strength, your eyes brightening as you implored the king for mercy, insisting that these fabricated plots were the work of your enemies. If mercy still exists, you whispered, let my daughter remain safe by her mother's side. But as night fell, that resolve shattered. You wept for little Elizabeth just shy of 3 years old. Innocent, yet already aware of her mother's disgrace. The ache of imagining your child's clear eyes, questioning your absence in her dreams, overwhelmed you. You begged to see Elizabeth one last time, even for a fleeting moment, to hold her and kiss her hair. But every plea was denied. The attendants would only turn away, bowing their heads to avoid your gaze. In place of that final embrace, you could only send your love heavenward in prayer and pour your heart into hastily written letters. Each one you folded carefully and placed into a small chest, though you knew they would never reach Elizabeth's hands like your final testament. Unheard. On the eve of your execution, the chamber seemed to grow even more silent, chilling to the bone. You knelt by the stiff wooden bed as the candlelight flickered across your sorrow-witched face. In the stillness, you softly intoned your prayers, concealing your fear and turmoil beneath a calm exterior. Each amen you spoke felt like a carving into the soul, a small spark of hope that death would not be the end, and that your spirit might find rest in eternity. You chose your final attire, an ash-grey gown paired with a pristine white kirtle. The grey echoed the charred remains of hope, the white, the spotless page of your innocence. You adjusted every stitch, and folded yourself, determined to preserve a final measure of regal grace. You handed your gilded crown, the lustrous pearl necklaces, and the jade rings to your attendants, every emblem of your former power willingly relinquished, so you would step unencumbered onto the scaffold. Your last meal was humble, a slice of coarse dark bread and a goblet of deep red wine. You chewed slowly, tasting the wine's sweetness entwined with its bitterness, as though partaking in a silent farewell between two worlds. You set the goblet on the wooden table, the candlelight dancing across its surface, as if reflecting the final moment of a mortal life. Each mouthful, each sip, served as a bell tolling the fragility of existence and the price of ambition forces that had propelled you from the throne's heights into the abyss. Tomorrow, you would not don your sumptuous royal robes or stride before cheering crowds. You would wear the grey gown to face the scaffold, You closed your eyes to feel the chill breeze drifting through the window, whispering its last counsel. Before fate called your name, the only sounds remaining were your own gasps of breath and the lingering scent of incense in the air, testaments to a life that had poured out every ounce of love and power, only to be claimed by death itself. In these final hours, you no longer thought of the crown, nor did you agonize over the political machinations that had brought you here. Instead, only one prayer echoed in your heart, for your daughter, for England, and for yourself. You vowed that, however brutal the road ahead, your purity and faith in justice would never be extinguished. For that alone was something no ruler could steal from you, for it was your sacred belief and the dignity of one last queen. After a long night, spent kneeling in prayer and readying your soul, the dawn mist of May 19 parted when a servant gently knocked on your door to announce that the moment had come. The dim morning light filtered through the narrow window frame, painting silver streaks across the stones of the Tower of London, as though heralding a new beginning, but the beginning of your final day. You drew a deep breath, striving to gather calm after the days of chaos, then placed your trembling hand on the doorknob. The door opened, awaiting your step into a moment no queen had ever known. Stepping onto Tower Green, you saw the crowd gathered densely upon the dew-wet grass. They formed a wide circle, dressed in varied attire, women in black mourning clothes, men in dark cloaks. Children hoisted onto their parents' shoulders to catch a clear view. None had ever witnessed a queen executed before their eyes. Today they stood motionless, drinking in the hot breath of the morning, waiting for this unprecedented moment in history. The space felt frozen. The wind, the only sound as it stirred hair and fabric. The scaffold was low, only about 5 feet high, designed so the audience could see every detail of the ritual. The wooden frame was rough but sturdy, crossbeams carefully nailed, the platform's surface smooth. Atop, it rested the square block where your head would lie. Underfoot, a layer of dry yellow straw had been spread evenly to soak up blood. You inspected every angle, every nail hole in the planks, as if committing to memory the features of the place where you would write the final chapter of your life. Your footsteps rang with resolve as you approached the scaffold. You carried yourself with regal dignity, your asher-grey gown billowing in the mist, not a single cry or whimper escaping your lips. All eyes were on you. Yet you fixed your gaze on the masked face of the French swordsman summoned from Calais to uphold Henry's humanitarian reputation. His mask concealed every expression, making him a symbol of frozen detachment. Like the blade poised to strike, when you stepped onto the prepared plank, you knelt slowly and laid your cheek upon the polished block. Your heart felt hollow, holding only one belief: faith in your soul, in the love you bore your child, and in the hope that God would receive you. You closed your eyes, bowed your head, focusing all your spirit into your prayers. Around you, only the soft command rang out, "Ready!" as if echoed from beyond. The French sword slid from amidst the straw beside the block, its metallic sheen glinting in the faint light. Its blade was slender, longer and sharper than any axe. Precise and swift, only a single stroke would end everything. You felt a chill ripple through you as the executioner raised his weapon. Your Gazahalf closed, centered on that final breath. In the blink after the prolonged cry of "Strike!" the blade fell. The metallic flash cut through the air. Then came the horrific silence. In that instant, your daze, as Queen ended, the crowd fell utterly still. No one reacting immediately. Only the sigh of the wind mingled with soft prayers like the final, somber note of a requiem. After a moment's stillness, a few sobs sounded, then gradually waves of tears and murmured doubts. They were stunned, unsure how to respond. Some whispered, "Where is justice?" Others bowed their heads in silent prayer. The image of a queen kneeling before her historic stroke became a scar etched into their hearts. a warning of the fragile value of power. Your death not only closed one life but transformed the royal court into a tragic stage for ruthless authority. Where feasts and music once rang out, now there was only wind and prayer. From the gilded throne to the cold wooden block, your journey had encompassed every high and low, replacing a heroic chronicle buried in the mists of Tower Green. When the swordsman sheathed his blade, the ritual was complete. The wooden bones of the scaffold lay silent, but the crowd slowly dispersed, leaving behind a deserted space and straw soaked in sorrow. You were led away from the scaffold, your body lifeless, though your soul soared free from its shackles. A final chapter closed, but the story of you, Boleyn, would live on through tears, through the whispers of witnesses, and in the silence of history, immediately after you were laid to rest beneath the white cloth. Your body was quietly carried through the shadowed corridors of the Tower of London toward the chapel of St. Peter Advincula, a communal burial site for those condemned as traitors. The funeral party moved with hushed footsteps, ignoring every gaze. Hastily placing your simple wooden coffin in its prepared spot, there was no choir of hymns, no solemn benediction, only the sound of hurried feet and flickering torchlight, making clear that you were being erased from the royal memory. When the coffin lid was closed, a thin layer of earth was shoveled up and poured swiftly into the grave. Those performing the burial turned away, unwilling to linger on the final sight of a queen. The thud of soil falling echoed through the silent space. The mossy-covered stones beside the tomb bore mute witness to the scene. St. Peter Advincula had received another soul, yet hurried to bury the past, as if obliterating every memory of Anne. Just 11 days later, Henry VIII departed the Tower of London and sailed to Greenwich on his royal barge. News of his secret wedding to Jane Seymour was kept absolutely confidential. In the stately but secluded riverside chamber, only a handful of trusted guests were invited, no ostentatious invitations, no press so that public opinion could not rise. The announcement of the marriage was quietly proclaimed, just enough to install Jane as queen and instantly cast Anne into the abyss of oblivion. While the wedding proceeded serenely, your image was gradually erased like the final brushstroke on a royal portrait. Portraits hanging throughout the palace from Whitehall to Greenwich were taken down in the dead of night. Boleyn crests carved into walls were removed, old adhesive still staining the stone below. All official records were revised. Your name vanished from royal registries. Your signed decrees treated as though they never existed. Every trace of a queen had to be wiped clean, so no one dared recall her. That erasure was a brutal lesson in the impermanence of power. With a single command from the king, all you had built dissolved into smoke and ash. Courtiers who had once hailed you as queen turned on a dime, publicly pledging loyalty to Jane Seymour to preserve their titles and prestige. The Boleyn family's favours were swiftly forgotten in council chambers. They let go of every kindness you had bestowed simply to survive. The palace buzzed once more. But that bustle was merely a curtain concealing a historic crime. To Henry, the Tower of London was a stage. There he displayed his power, then struck the set and reset the scene for the next act. Within 2 weeks, one tragic chapter closed. A new marriage decree was issued, and the palace seemed to paste blank pages over its walls to tell a different story. The public was guided to forget the queen traitor and embrace the gentle queen. Power slid swiftly, like a weary warhorse, stopping only at the next throne. Tudor history thundered on with its merciless rhythm. Henry's wives appeared and vanished in turn. Like chess pieces in a political game, they ascended and were deposed, their names effaced, leaving only tomb inscriptions or scattered letters. No chapter in that play allowed anyone to rest easy once crowned. The throne was the highest prize, ready to sacrifice anyone in its path. Meanwhile, the memory of you lay buried beneath the moss of St. Peter Advincula, yet the echo of a queen who dared to seek power and love could not be completely erased. People whispered of the secret letters you wrote to your daughter, of ghostly tales of Anne wandering the tower on stormy nights, though your name no longer appeared in the official annals. Those whispers formed a steadfast shell, preserving your memory. The courtiers, though they exchanged all their jewelry and insignia, harboured a quiet fear. The throne Henry occupied could cast them into the same abyss if he so willed. Absolute power is a double-edged sword, able to grant grace or seize anyone at will. The palace grew wary whenever your name was mentioned. It became taboo, living only in furtive stories shared behind closed doors. And so, as night fell over the Tower of London, only the winds howl through the stone arches, and the lingering scent of incense in St. Peter ad Vincula remained. The story of you, Anne Boleyn, had ended with a simple yet blood-stained ritual, then sank into the shared memory of humanity. Though history might turn away, your spirit soared above tears and the whispers of witnesses, reminding us that power, no matter how fleeting, leaves an indelible mark on the hearts of men. Your legacy transcends the cruelty of that judgment day. Though your body now rests beneath the shroud and memories of your tragic death have begun to fade, the image of Anne Boleyn will never vanish. Your daughter, Elizabeth, born under the shadow of that unjust court, would ascend to the throne as the great Elizabeth II, a vivid testament to the strength and intellect you passed on. It was a magnificent inheritance, from a mother falsely accused of adultery and redeemed only by burning love. Elizabeth revived the belief in powerful, talented women. From early childhood, Elizabeth grew up branded the traitor's daughter, yet she was raised by those loyal to Anne. Your servants, clergy, and scholars quietly preserved your memory in their stories and hidden letters. They instilled in Elizabeth a spirit of resilience, a thirst for learning, and a keen awareness of her own rights. The Elizabeth who emerged was not only of royal blood, but also imbued with a passion for justice and a willingness to defy convention's qualities you had sacrificed your life for. When Elizabeth formally took the throne in 1558, she immediately set a style of rule distinct from her father's, undeterred by threats from foreign powers and internal factions. Under Elizabeth's reign, England's culture entered a golden age, the Virgin Queen era. Many say that without Anne's wrongful death, Elizabeth might not have been fully recognised as a formidable ruler, for history used her mother's tragedy as a backdrop to amplify the daughter's achievements. For 5 centuries, historians have debated the nature of the adultery and treason charges against you. Was it solely a fabrication by Thomas Cromwell to serve Henry VIII's wish to renew the throne? Or was there truly convincing evidence? Scholars such as Eric Ives and Retha Warnicki, among others, have dissected Sir William Kingston's records, court transcripts, and royal correspondence in search of the truth. They highlight numerous inconsistencies in the indictment, dates that contradict your known whereabouts, witnesses who were dead and thus could not be cross-examined, and Smeaton's confession extracted under torture deemed unreliable. This slender evidence and coerced testimony cast deep doubt on the court's legitimacy. The Tudor criminal process did not allow you to call counsel or witnesses, and its laws were particularly deficient for women. The oral accounts of politically weaker figures like musician Smeaton or palace guards were treated as equal to physical evidence. Thus, you could only defend yourself in words, with no means to verify or challenge the claims. Consequently, your story became a tragic symbol of justice, trampled at Westminster Hall. The court served not to seek truth, but to legitimize a political decree. The image of a queen kneeling in mourning robes, silently praying before her execution, became emblematic of deceit and cruelty. People remembered that verdict as a warning. Power does not inherently equate to justice, and truth can become a casualty of ruthless political maneuvering. Your legacy also lives on in countless paintings, literary works, and films. From Shakespeare's tragedy that revered the woman who dared challenge the throne, to historical novels celebrating your intelligence and courage, every generation has drawn inspiration from your story in the struggle for women's rights and social justice. Tales of Anne Boleyn's ghost still circulate in eerie Tower of London tours, but those spectres are not curses. They are reminders of an unbending spirit. Historical sites from the British Library to the tower itself continue to draw visitors eager to see your final resting place. St. Peter ad Vincula may be austere, but it is a treasure trove of memory, the resting place of those crushed by blind power. Though your coffin was simple, every brick and worn inscription by your tomb speaks to a humanity once forgotten. Today, when people mention Anne Boleyn, they speak not only of a brutal death, but of a woman who dared defy societal constraints and absolute power. Your image has become legendary, transcending tragedy to broadcast the strength of human will. Feminist movements, scholarly conferences, and research papers still invoke your name as a case study of political power's abuse of the law and of truth's enduring vitality. Ultimately, your legacy affirms that justice is a journey without end, and truth always demands courage to uphold. Elizabeth II resurrected that legacy, ruling with wisdom and integrity to embody the immortal queen you once dreamed of being. Your name, once denied and erased from the official chronicles, has been restored on the pages of a new history, proving that will and vision can rise above tragedy to illuminate future generations. Power may transform and obliterate anyone, but truth and justice outlast all thrones. Anne Boleyn's story still echoes across the ages as a clarion call to posterity when justice is trampled. Remember the tears and prayers of a queen who dared to live and who sacrificed herself for her ideals. That is the greatest legacy you have left the world, an unwavering faith in a fairer future. News of Anne Boleyn's execution spread across Europe like lightning in the night. The Catholic courts, already shaken by Henry VIII's break with the Pope, now witnessed the king personally behead his queen to further his own ambitions. In France, the ambassadors of Louis XII openly expressed outrage. They called it a villainous act, a symbol of lawless despotism that stained the diplomatic goodwill between two once friendly thrones. In Spain, Charles V directed his Foreign Office to record every detail and circulate it to all legations. England has become the notorious example of religious betrayal, where personal power tramples every law. Diplomatic dispatches traded between Madrid, Paris, and Rome emphasized that Henry VIII's reputation had suffered grievously. They did not hesitate to label him a tyrant and the new Church of England a heretical institution. In Rome, Pope Paul III grew even more suspicious of the Church of England's legitimacy. The belief that the new national church was an independent vessel of God was undermined when Henry used it to justify his political break and to destroy the Queen herself. Some cardinals feared a new feudal papacy, forming one in which faith was subservient to royal edict. It was not only the nobility, ordinary English folk were also haunted. Travelling fairs in market towns staged mock trials of Anne the Traitor to draw crowds. But behind the laughter lay unease. People wondered, as they watched a queen kneel before the axe, were they witnessing justice or mere political hypocrisy? Whispers of justice or politics echoed through alleys, streets, and marketplaces. Market women murmured at their stalls. It's no joke. She almost became queen once. And children, trembling, huddled together to whisper of the ghost of Anne haunting the tower's dark corridors. That turning point pierced Europe's heart, revealing how absolute power can crush justice and conscience. Yet despite this international outcry, Henry VIII pressed on. Just 11 days after Anne's death, he held a secret wedding to Jane Seymour. The ceremony was discreet. Only his most loyal attendants were invited. There were no jubilant bands, no throngs of guests. Everything was designed to erase memories of Anne. This haste only laid bare the king's fickleness and his insatiable thirst for absolute power. Seated on the same throne, Henry proclaimed, "Whoever stands in my way will pay the price." Okay. The English court thereafter was steeped in fear. Courtiers who had once championed the Boleyn cause now bowed to Jane Seymour. They recalibrated alliances, avoided mentioning Anne, and altered records so that Jane was the true second queen. Anyone who dared lift their head to inquire about Anne risked losing office. Praise for Anne's merits was branded opposition to the king. Within the royal household, no one dared show visible loyalty to the fallen queen. One misstep could cast them next as traitors or heretics. At banquet, the clinking of goblets rang hollow as glances passed instead of whispered questions. Courtiers inclined their heads before Jane Seymour, treating her as the symbol of proper loyalty and submission. They knew that should Henry turn his favour elsewhere, any of them might become a disposable pawn, from the Lord Steward to the Lord Chancellor. Every position was subject to the king's whim. The palace glittered as though no shocking death had occurred weeks before. Laughter continued. Yet a silent dread lingered beneath it all. Meanwhile, the walls of the Tower of London bore silent witness. Darkness draped its passageways, a reminder that absolute power had silenced justice. Many English citizens who had once gawked at the public execution couldn't shake a pervasive unease. Whispers of, "Was that justice?" echoed on the wind, filling London's streets with conflicting rumours. Still, Henry VIII paid them no mind. He turned his court into a royal marriage shop, where each wife was mere ornament, replaceable at will. Jane Seymour's swift marriage without elaborate rites showed Henry's desire to end the Boleyn drama and begin the next chapter of his dominion. To him, the throne mattered more than any custom or ritual. Royal blood existed to serve his personal aims. Even if that meant erasing a princess's mother, power is a double-edged sword. It grants the authority to decide life and death, but it also forces its wielder to live in fear and isolation. The Tower of London stood firm, its stones marking the bloody pages of the Tudor saga. Within its cold walls, whispers of justice or politics still rang out. A warning about the many layers of ruthless authority. The execution of Anne Boleyn established a terrifying precedent. A young queen, just yesterday celebrated and cherished, could be struck from the records and expunged from history on the basis of a fabricated indictment. From that moment on, any woman who assumed the title of Queen under Henry VIII did so under a constant shadow of fear. Anna of Cleves, the fourth wife chosen by portrait, upon entering the court, had to restrain every gesture of intimacy. Catherine Howard, the youthful and captivating cousin once expected to bring fresh joy to the court, ultimately bowed her head under rumours of adultery. Catherine Parr, the final wife and Henry's confidante, likewise had to measure every word and action, lest the Queen's household become a black fund of intrigue. Anne's downfall did more than erase an individual's honour. It served as a stark warning to anyone daring to share power beside the throne. Within the royal court, an atmosphere of urgency and vigilance reigned. All ministers, officials, household heads, and even the nearest attendants had to weigh every word. A lingering glance at the new queen, an overly effusive compliment to any woman, or even the slightest expression of sympathy for Anne's fate could suffice to summon someone to the stage of Westminster Hall. Rumours of the Queen who strangled the realm caused every power relationship in the palace to be monitored more closely. Thomas Cromwell's private notebooks and personal letters fell under suspicion. Anyone accused of breaching decorum risked being labelled a co-conspirator with the former queen. Gone was the gentle management of affairs. The palace became a place of few smiles and countless machinations. As everyone understood that one false accusation could send their entire family to the Tower. From the end of Anne's tenure, even the most lavish festivities bore attention. The Queen's smiles no longer symbolised serene authority. Instead, they were wary looks and measured gestures. Subsequent queens lost virtually all autonomy in selecting their ladies-in-waiting or hosting private feasts. They relied on bands chosen by the king, wore garments laid out by the royal wardrobe, ensuring that every move stayed within the permitted limits. Henry imposed after Anne vanished from the throne. One of the clearest signs of that ruthless power was Henry VIII's choice to summon a French swordsman to execute Anne. a detail that both awed and terrified the English nobility. Instead of the traditional English axe, with its spectacle of a heavy blow for all to see, the king opted for the sleek finesse of a Calais blade. This decision not only signalled his ambition for a European style, but also demonstrated his willingness to employ any tactic to avoid scandal. The French sword was cleaner, quicker, and shrouded in white cloth, making the event appear more humane to the public. The English aristocracy did not forget this nuance. They recognized that the king was not only utterly merciless, but also savvy in exploiting foreign cultural symbols to shape public opinion and preserve royal prestige. When people spoke of cruelty, they dubbed it the romantic death style, a message that, regardless of English tradition, the king could rewrite the rules at will. The banner of independence after the break with the Pope became a French delegation within England, where monarchy sacrificed even traditions to safeguard the royal image. Thus, from the moment Anne died, any queen entering the court had to ask herself, "How will I depart? Am I fortunate enough to secure a peaceful marriage?" Not only the nobility, but even clergy and young scholars dared not openly praise any reign that elevated powerful women. Any sermon on justice and mercy had to skillfully avoid royal marriage topics, lest it be branded subversive. Monasteries and prestigious colleges at Oxford and Cambridge quietly postponed theses on female power to avoid sensitive political issues. To the populace, the Tower of London had long stood as a symbol of iron-fisted authority. On the grass where the scaffold had stood, echoes of hammer blows still rang a reminder that even the grandest throne could take any life. Tales of Anne Boleyn's ghost haunting lamplit streets circulated, warning each generation that power spares no one. In theatres, dramatic portrayals of a ruler wielding lives like chess pieces endured as symbols. The sovereign is merely a pawn of merciless fate. Even afterward, historians considered Anne's death a watershed, demonstrating the might of absolute monarchy. Law lectures often opened with the Boleyn tragedy, a prime example of how law and governance can diverge, and the consequences thereof. Law students were cautioned to remain vigilant against the court of power, where the courts become tools to legitimize political schemes. This event also deeply affected Christian Europe. Theologians debated whether royal overreach might imperil religious liberty. For decades, the Church of England, though independent, was viewed as susceptible to the lure of absolute power, prompting ongoing Vatican and Roman scrutiny of the English court culturally. Anne's death provided rich material for artists. The scaffold's frame, the ash-grey gown, the French sword, all these details reappear in tragic paintings, memorial statues, and Shakespeare's play The Tragedy of Anne Boleyn. That work not only depicts the crime, but also honours the spirit of a woman who dared to challenge immoral authority. To this day, visitors at Tower Green pause, bowing their heads in remembrance not only of Anne Boleyn's image, but also of a priceless lesson. When power is forged in the flames of ambition, justice is its first casualty. And that is the legacy Anne Boleyn left behind, an eternal warning. The throne is not a place to seek love and loyalty, but a brutal arena where human conscience can be erased by the fire of ambition. Following the bloody tragedies that had befallen the Tudor dynasty, the birth of Prince Edward in 1537 seemed to satisfy the king at last. He finally had the longer-desired male heir, Queen Jane Seymour. With her unmatched devotion and loyalty, was celebrated as the perfect exemplar of the ideal wife. London Palace rang with drums and cymbals, while senior ministers lit incense to offer thanks to heaven and earth. Never before had the hope for an heir been so fervently anticipated, and that longing eclipsed all the bitterness of the preceding years. Yet the joy was fleeting. Less than 2 years later, in late 1538, Jane Seymour, who had given birth to Prince Edward, suddenly succumbed to postpartum complications. A violent attack of puerperal fever set in, accompanied by convulsions and extreme debility, and despite the royal physician's devoted efforts, her life could not be saved. The court once again plunged into mourning. The red banners that once fluttered over celebratory drums became solemn shrouds of grief. Though praised as the gentle heart and saviour of the realm, Jane Seymour ultimately could not escape the Queen's curse that had claimed her royal predecessors. That outcome illustrated a terrifying pattern. Whenever a queen was brought into the court, she embodied political power and hope. But once she ceased to be useful, a few lines of proclamation or a sealed letter could be enough to bring her fate to an end. After Jane Seymour came Catherine Howard, Anne Boleyn's young and vivacious cousin. Despite her youthful charm that excited the court, she quickly fell under suspicion of adultery. That affair ended in a hasty trial in 1542, and Catherine Howard, like her cousin before her, met the executioner's axe. Only Catherine Parr, the sixth and final wife, skillfully navigated the royal household. She served both as a confidant and as a mediator between the king and his sons, which allowed her to survive the tumult. When the king died in 1547, Catherine Parr was permitted to live on, returning to a private life. The tragic sequence of these four royal wives stands as the clearest testament to the ruthless power of absolute monarchy in Tudor England. They were not merely spouses, but political pawns. From Anne Boleyn, the woman who opened this bloody chapter, to Jane Seymour, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr, each reign represents a tragic act in which personal happiness was crushed beneath the wheels of political ambition. Within the court, from the moment of Anne's execution onward, an atmosphere of urgency and vigilance took hold. Every minister, magistrate, and even the most intimate attendants weighed each word and gesture. A lingering glance at the new queen, an overly enthusiastic compliment to any woman, or even a single look of sympathy for Jane Seymour could prompt a summons to the stage of Westminster Hall. Rumours of the Queen who strangled the realm led to tighter surveillance of all power relationships within the palace. Thomas Cromwell's secret notebooks and private letters were under scrutiny. One false accusation could strip an entire family of titles and throw them into prison. Although lavish celebrations and grand feasts continued, the smiles of the subsequent queens no longer symbolized peaceful authority, but rather wary eyes and cautious motions. They lost virtually all autonomy in choosing their ladies-in-waiting or organizing private banquets. Every musical piece, garment, and makeup style was prepared by the royal household, ensuring no action ever exceeded the permitted limits set in the wake of Anne Boleyn's tragedy. One of the most striking signs of this system's brutality was the decision to summon a French swordsman to execute Anne rather than use the traditional English axe. This not only demonstrated an ambition for a European style, but also showed the court's willingness to employ any means to avoid scandal. The French sword was lighter, swifter, and wrapped in white cloth, creating a humane appearance in the public eye. English nobles both admired and feared this detail, recognizing that the sovereign was not only utterly merciless but also cunning in leveraging foreign cultural symbols to manipulate public opinion and preserve royal prestige. The banner of independence after the break with the Pope had become a French embassy within England, where monarchy traded tradition for reputation. Thus, from Anne Boleyn onward, any woman entering the royal family had to ask herself, "How will I depart? Will I be fortunate enough to preserve my happiness and my life?" Not only the nobility, but even clergy and scholars dared not openly praise a reign that elevated women to power. Any sermon on justice and mercy had to skillfully avoid mention of royal marriages, lest it be branded subversive. Oxford and Cambridge colleges quietly postponed dissertations on women's power to avoid sensitive political issues. The Tower of London, the site of Anne's bloodshed, still stands as a symbol of iron-fisted authority. On Tower Green, the hammer blows that built the scaffold echo as a chilling reminder. Even the most splendid throne can snatch away anyone's life. Tales of Anne Boleyn's ghost wandering beneath lamplight serve each generation as a warning of power's cruelty. In theatres, dramas about rulers who command life and death endure as allegories, reminding audiences that the court is but an instrument of a merciless fate. And each reign is bought with human blood, though over 5 centuries have passed. Historians still regard the fates of the 4 Tudor queens as a harsh lesson in the fragility of royal happiness under absolute power. Law lectures frequently begin with the Boleyn tragedy, as a vivid example of how law and politics can diverge, and of the consequences when the judiciary becomes a tool to legitimize political schemes. Law students are advised to remain vigilant against the court of power, where the judiciary is wielded as a political weapon. This episode also profoundly affected Christian Europe. Theologians worried that royal overreach might imperil religious liberty. For decades afterward, the Church of England, despite its independence, was viewed as vulnerable to the temptations of absolute power, prompting continued scrutiny from the Vatican and Rome. Culturally, Anne's death became an endless source of inspiration. The scaffold's framework, the ash-grey gown, the French sword. Every detail was reproduced in tragic paintings, poignant monuments, and Shakespeare's play The Tragedy of Anne Boleyn. That work not only depicts the crime, but also honors the indomitable spirit of a woman who dared to challenge unjust power. To this day, visitors at Tower Green pause in remembrance not only of Anne Boleyn, but to learn a priceless lesson. When power is forged in the flames of ambition, justice is its first casualty, and that is Anne Boleyn's greatest legacy, an eternal warning. The throne is not a place to seek love and loyalty, but a ruthless arena where human conscience can be consumed by the fire of ambition. Although the king was intent on portraying her as the villain who stole the throne's heart, the machinery of power could not erase the image of the queen who once shook the realm. Her name endures in handwritten chronicles, in secret letters, and on every meticulous page of Sir William Kingston's journals. He who was tasked with recording her every word and gesture before she left this world. Thanks to those documents, later generations can still revisit the past and question the veracity of every accusation. Over the centuries, renowned historians such as Eric Ives and Retha Warneke have tirelessly delved into the Westminster court records, pored over private correspondence preserved by secretaries, and even undertaken DNA analysis of royal remains to unearth clues. They have put forward compelling arguments that the evidence for adultery, the musician's testimony, and the court guard's statements and the incest charges were entirely fabricated to serve the political schemes of Thomas Cromwell and the court guard's statements. Crown. To these dedicated researchers, the trial emerges not as a fair process, but as a political tragedy staged to justify a predetermined outcome. Beyond official archives, English folk culture preserves chilling legends of the Queen's ghost, haunting the tower on stormy nights. People say that whenever wind and rain lash the stones, whispers of her grievance echo among the mossy-grown walls. By torchlight, some swear they have glimpsed a grey figure slipping through the bars, seeking justice one last time. Though shaped by legend, these stories remind the public not to forget the wrong done behind that brutal tribunal. From the 19th century to the present, English literature and film have repeatedly depicted the proud queen betrayed by her court. On the pages of historical novels, she stands as a monument of courage and intelligence, facing down the machine of tyranny. On screen, actors and directors focus on her inner world, the anguish upon hearing her indictment, the calm dignity of her final moments, and her longing to leave a legacy. Film. Each book evokes powerful sympathy for her unjust fate, while underscoring a profound truth. Power may grant dazzling glory, yet it can drive men to the most horrific crimes. The Tower of London itself remains silent witness, the beam where the scaffold once stood, the shards of white ribbon still clinging to old walls. In the British Library, Tudor chronicles and court files lie in the stacks, awaiting scholars' scrutiny. Ink bottles, quills, and wooden chests that once held smuggled letters display in museum galleries, reminding visitors how fragile power is without justice. Contemporary Tudor studies continually mine new data from analysing surviving fragments of her morning gown to digitising excavation reports of the Tower grounds, seeking to illuminate every hidden corner. Over time, her story has become more than a personal tragedy. It stands as a symbol of women's struggle beyond society's constraints. Today, in women's history courses, her name appears alongside pioneering figures of female leadership, testifying to the quest for autonomy and equity. She dared to challenge prejudice and paid the ultimate price for her ideals, a poignant lesson in courage and the necessity of justice. International conferences on European history often feature sessions devoted to her wrongful trial. Scholars from many nations debate fiercely. Was the trial driven by political factions threatening the nobility's interests, forcing silence? Or did rival courts within the palace exploit false testimony to achieve their ends? Each new question and piece of evidence rekindles hope that truth will emerge, even though the past was meticulously orchestrated. In contemporary art circles, museums in London and Edinburgh have mounted exhibitions titled The Tudor Trial, exploring the intersections of power and justice. They display oil paintings of the Tower under brooding skies, alongside abstract sculptures depicting a kneeling woman. Visitors sometimes weep when reading the etched words on a memorial plaque. Here rests the soul of a woman who dared demand justice. End 4. Yet even when her name no longer appears on official registers, the people's consciousness refuses to let her be forgotten. In villages across England, in roadside taverns, travellers still recount tales of the wronged queen, though often embellished or fictionalized. Those stories serve as a guiding light. Power must be balanced by responsibility, and justice must not be silenced beneath the weight of tyranny. In the end, her legacy, whether a secret dispatch, a lone grey gown, or the echo of Westminster Hall's bells, carries one message: no one can wield absolute power to bury the truth forever. Each successive generation will again cast the light of knowledge and morality upon the past, so that voices once suppressed can ring out anew. The story of Anne Boleyn, from glory to tragedy, from verdict to legend, thus lives on in humanity's memory as a powerful testament to the unending struggle between power and justice. The tragic journey did not end merely with the echo of the axe upon the wooden floor, but with the closing of a dream, that of a society where women truly hold the power to decide their own fates. From the tender girl once cherished beside her childhood friend, she rose to the splendor of the throne, becoming the very center of influence and authority. Yet ambition and political maneuvering hurled her into turmoil, where love became a weapon, and every breath served the calculus of power. Her story, therefore, is a harsh blend of aspiration, romance, and the price exacted by authority. When that orchestrated trial concluded, all eyes turned to the silent scaffold post, and the courtiers returned to their accustomed duties. Though the verdict still reverberated in the cold stones of the fortress, but her spirit was not buried by wind, rain, or ocean of ink. Her intelligence, her resolve, and her remarkable dignity endure on every page of history, in the memories of those who witnessed her, and in the passion of scholars who followed. That legacy is a wellspring of inspiration, reminding us that, however glorious power may seem, it always carries a steep price. For the drowsy listener, her tale becomes a lullaby, both soothing and sobering. Happiness is fragile as dew upon a bubble, and power always accompanies duty and dread. She dared to live fully for her own dreams, to give her life for love and for a noble role. In return, she paid with her life a price few would dare weigh. Yet even at the moment of death's approach, her regal bearing and boundless compassion shone through each whispered prayer and every fold of mourning cloth. This stands as clear proof that spiritual strength cannot be crushed, even when the world falls apart. Let the image of this woman, a figure immortalized for daring to love and to rebel, be the guiding light for your sleep. When your eyes close, Dream of a world where women's voices are heard and respected, where power is never handed to the ruthless, but reserved for those who wield it with justice and compassion. Though history may be cruel, do not let darkness extinguish hope that faith and resilience will survive. In that dream, you find yourself stepping through an ancient gate, the door of the tower having closed on that bloodied past. Dim torchlight casts a shadow of a woman in an ash-grey gown, her eyes alight with an undying flame. Her final breath is not one of defeat but a farewell song, an anthem of loyalty to ideals, of the will's potency, and of the yearning for justice. From that moment on, I'll fear Fardas, leaving only the belief that truth, though it may be buried, will rise again like a seed sprouting from parched earth. Finally, I wish you a peaceful night, filled with dreams of justice and love that transcend the boundaries of time. Tomorrow, when dawn breaks, there will still be stories waiting to be told, powers to be kept in check, and dreams awaiting the courage to ignite them. Centurisme pas. But her spirit, that of a woman who dared to live and to sacrifice, continues to kindle the hearts of generations to come. And you, in your tranquil slumber, hold that faith close, so that when you awaken, you will know that justice and love are forever intertwined in humanity's journey.